Chris, I don't know whether you're able to see the screen, right? This is an Indian prayer for humanity, not necessarily belonging to any particular religion, but it's a Sanskrit shloka. And as you see the translation, it is all about wishing the humanity and the world of the Almighty. So I think this is so appropriate now, right? In this moment, that we pray for the entire universe, no more for ourselves, because it's proven now that we are all one.
Very much. It was a beautiful prayer, and yeah, perfect for the moment.
Yeah, I'm sure people are going to keep coming in, but it's time. It's 10:30, so we should be starting off, Chris. I thought I'll make a small introduction and then we could get on to our conversation, and that's the format that we are looking at.
Perfect. I'm looking forward.
So welcome all the participants. Like I was just sharing with Chris right now, we are overwhelmed by the number of people who wanted to join today's webinar. We felt that it was important to respond to this crisis and bring together school leaders under the common umbrella of not just looking at how to survive through these times, but thrive. And I think it is so important today that we don't lose it with this fight of humanity with this virus and what this virus represents symbolically, that anything can come anytime and we need to stand united. Chrysalis is right now offering 4 webinars. We got now the goodwill of not only thousands and thousands of schools in the country, but I would say the cherished partnership and collaborative spirit with educators and educational organizations across the globe. Chris represents New Zealand and the University of Waikato, and he will be launching this series today with us. And we will see as we go by, what are we going to deep dive into in this today's webinar. Today is number 1 webinar, the 17th of April. We are right now and rightfully focusing on teachers and teaching. That is really put to test today. How do we teach? We are going to the basics, if I may, to talk to someone who works so closely with teachers and is so involved in teaching, has been a teacher himself and continues to be so, Chris Henderson. Before I start, I thought for Chris and for all the school principals and leaders who are on this webinar, we should put out Chrysalis perspectives of how we see when we take a step back on how Indian schools are reacting and responding. I'm sure this is also across the world, but what I'm going to enumerate right now is what we are seeing close to close home on how schools are reacting and responding. I want to bring the difference between these two words, which we all perhaps know and are familiar with. The positive aspect is that amazing quick response and adaptation to online and remote learning possibilities. I have heard many times in my own circle and when we, from my own, that there is a lot of hesitation for even the high level schools to go online, and teachers resist. You know, these are the common articles and perspectives that come out, but I'm really surprised on how overnight almost the teachers have started taking the challenge and responding with online and remote learning possible. I think I'm also overwhelmed and overjoyed in seeing how teachers are putting learning needs in the forefront. Not willing to succumb to what the COVID-19 has brought on to us, and they are enduring lessons and concepts across means and ways possible and familiar to them. While these are, I would say, very good from, the power of humanity and how this community of education is reacting, I also have some questions, and I'm sure through this webinar, we will also be exploring the two sides of these questions that I'm going to put out. I wonder, and we at Chrysalis are also being, we've been deliberating on the fact, are we on a panic work mode? Because like I said, literally overnight, we are seeing that we are moving without rest, without pause moments to communicate to parents, to send home learning modules, to get across lessons. We are wondering, will a few weeks of no lessons really rock the boat? This is a question foremost on our mind, and I'm sure we'll get some answers today. There is, I think, a new use of this word now called the panic work mode. And are we all succumbing to that panic work mode? Are we, and with all humility, I'm questioning myself here, are we cognizant of the burnout, school leaders, teachers, parents, students, that such a hurried mode to transition so quickly could result in? I think this is a very, very important question to pause and reflect, and none other than Chris can help us with some of his thoughts and perspectives on that. I also want to go in deeper here to one thought that we have at Chrysalis: learning needs versus learner needs. And these two, I think, has subtle and gross distinction, if I may say so. Are we pausing to reflect on the pedagogy most suited for remote learning? Is it the same, or is it even similar to classroom pedagogy? Are teachers kind of doing what they would be doing inside the class over Zoom? Is that the way to go about things? Are we learners' emotional well-being? And needs will differ with different age group, the early education, the kindergarten children, the primary, the secondary, and the grade 12 examination facing children. Each one of them have their own emotional needs and their well-being. Are we considering that thoughtfully? I'm sure we are all well-intended people, and every teacher here is full of good intentions, but are we considering these in a clinical manner is my question. And finally, using technology, are we teaching concepts to Rohan, or are we teaching Rohan the concepts? Whom are we putting in front? Is it the learner? Is it the concept? And I think this is the time that technology can actually be used to the advantage of the unique learner in each student. I think these are some of the questions that we have for school leaders to reflect on. And I'm very thankful for this opportunity that my organization has given me, and also very, very thankful to Chris, whom I'm going to be introducing formally now. Chris, like I said, is an associate director with the International Education and Development. And, I have been always puzzled on what this crisis context collaborative and emergency education for emergency. It's dawned on me that Chris has had very good experience in this, what I thought from all your writing, Chris, what I thought reflects you so well, is this quote of yours: despite the potentially tragic consequences of this time, shows your awareness, that you're cognizant of what the outcome could be or when the outcome could change, etc. But you're also such a, I like to call you a calming educator. All my interactions with you has calmed me. And, and your statement that we are also part of an exciting and historic global movement for change. When I read this, it gave me such a, feeling of power and responsibility to use the power in the best manner. So I thought this quote of yours reflects your personality, and I put it out there for every single participant here to see you. We know you, and I think there's an opportunity for them to see Chris and what you can do in such a situation. I also know that you have been working, and I want to share with the participants here, been particularly gaining experience and developing expertise in emergency situation education. But all of it, as he himself observes, has been on very localized and regional topical kind of emergency situations. It could be terrorism, terrorist attacks. It could have been the Christchurch earthquake that you have often quoted. But I think Chris observes rightfully, in traditional crisis, we connect with children and adolescents in temporary physical spaces to reinforce relationships. Perhaps you would have recommended touch therapy, right? I mean, like holding the hand of the student, calming him by touch and sensory organs, and create meaningful learning. But I think COVID-19, as you rightly observe, denies us this opportunity, but allows us, again, the positive view, to develop or rework our pedagogical playbooks online. I think the word online also gains significance, though we will be in our series taking technology separately in one of the webinars, but I'm sure we cannot do any sessions today without technology and the power of the word itself. I am also proudly recalling the moments that Chris had in Chrysalis' office. Chris, you may remember this photograph, and we have some beautiful moments when you met with many of our school leaders and visited some schools. I must say here that though I've been projecting Chris as an international expert, he does have experience as well. So he's the right person for today's session. So I'm going to jump into the questions. Chris, I hope you're ready. If you want to start off with the introduction, you can, and then I can go into the first question as well. Would you want to make some introductory remarks, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And first and foremost, just to thank you for your generous introduction and to communicate to everyone on the webinar today, just our thoughts and prayers from New Zealand to everyone in India, especially principals and teachers. I mean, there has been no other moment in history, I think, where we can genuinely say we're all in this together. So yeah, we're on the same journey, and we're with you with the challenges, but also with the opportunities that are afforded to us. Just briefly, also want to acknowledge a couple of my colleagues who are on this call. So Catherine Hodson, Jan-Marie Callow, and Honor are my colleagues at University of Waikato. And I've invited them to be a part of today's webinar as part of the audience as well, because I want them to learn more about the great work that the Chrysalis are doing in India, and also just the potential of the partnership that the University of Waikato has with Chrysalis. And just before we get into the questions, just to echo some of what Chitra said, is I have an accidental, unfortunate background in that I did not mean to be specialising in crisis context. I did not especially want to work with emergencies. However, I've been a teacher and been working with schools in places where emergencies have taken place, whether they've been major earthquakes, terrorist attacks, or now we have like a pandemic. And through these experiences, which have been quite accidental, I didn't mean to be in the wrong place at the right time. I have been privileged to learn a lot about the way teachers and school leaders navigate really difficult times, but how we can come out the other side of that difficulty better off for ourselves, but also for our children and communities. So yeah, I look forward to diving deeper with you all today.
Thank you, Chris. I just wanted to, before going to the first question, right, I think during some conversations with you, you have rightly brought out that there has been transition and change through the decades, right, and rather slowly. But what this has done is brought this into sudden, sharp focus. For instance, I think you and I and Chrysalis team have been discussing on the inclusion of social, emotional skill that we need to build into literacy and cognitive skills. We have been exploring technology. All these today, I think, have overnight become imperative. So in that context, I want to start off with a question to you. that given the uncertainties, what's the topmost priority for school leaders when it comes to teachers? And I bring this here, it's not just my question or the question from Chrysalis. So many schools have been alert to this, and they've been asking us, what should we be doing? So what is your perspective on that, Chris?
It's a great question. And I think the beauty of us as educators and school leaders is the reason we're in this workforce, the reason we are these professionals, is we care so much about children and communities. Often in our care for children and communities, we actually overlook the needs of the people who make the magic happen, our teachers. And what's really interesting is there's emerging research and emerging advocacy internationally at the UN level, at the World Bank level, and through a lot of international NGOs that's realizing for us to actually serve children and communities as best as we can, we actually need to serve teachers first and foremost. And so over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of research in the field of psychology, in the field of education, anthropology, sociology, and all this research is showing that the better conditions are for teachers, be that their pay, be that the way we see teachers as society, see them as leaders, see them as change makers, and the way that they feel that status and respect in their day-to-day work, the better off they are, the better our children do too. And so there's a direct correlation between the well-being of children and the learning outcomes of children with the well-being of teachers. And so to answer the question more specifically, the top priority for school leaders is to make sure your teachers are well. And so, I mean, I love the way you're framing so much of this, Chitra, in that are we reacting or are we responding to this time? Are we in a panic work mode? Are we rushing to create solutions? And the best thing we can do right now is actually not panic, not rush, and actually just give ourselves time. I mean, my colleague, Catherine Hodson, who's on this webinar as well, you know, she said this beautiful phrase over the last few weeks, which is, let's pause and make the most of this gift of time, that this is a gift of time. And so we've been allowed to kind of connect with how we're responding to this challenge, connect with how we're feeling, most importantly, connect with our families, connect with our loved ones, and ensure that we're in the right mental and emotional space to actually then be the change makers and leaders that our children expect of us.
Right. So I think yeah, in one word, you know, we always say, take this reference of in the aircraft, you know, we are asked to put the oxygen mask first, even before we put it on our child, perhaps. So I think it is important to preserve the stamina and the well-being of ourselves, you know, the school leaders as teachers. And that's what you have beautifully said. Thanks to Kat. Pause and make use of the gift of time. That's so beautiful, Catherine. I love that line. So you are essentially saying that the priority is the well-being, right? So we thought the number one takeaway from all our conversations and what you have just said is focus on the teacher's long-term well-being, because it's about preservation. It's about sustenance. We cannot afford to lose teachers to burnout. And we should not merely accommodate to the current circumstances while we have keep the boat sailing, right? So that's exactly what you have expressed here as well. Thank you, Chris. I think the second question is more about specifically the teacher and her mindset or her beliefs. And so you have done a lot of work in areas of teacher mindset. Talk a lot about it in your blog posts and your seminars. I was wondering if you could accentuate and highlight on what mindsets will help teachers in these times and beyond, you know.
And it's another awesome question because it connects so much to the first one, which is if we create the conditions and the support as leaders for teachers to be well and for teachers to feel supported and confident in their role and to feel that they have an important status in our schools and society, then we actually support them to think more creatively and more critically about who they are as teachers and what they're capable of doing, particularly in a crisis context. And so I think so much about this question when we're looking at teacher beliefs, it is about that idea of what is my identity as a professional? What kind of efficacy or what kind of effect do I have on my colleagues and the learners I work with? And you cannot start thinking like that unless you've got a community around you who communicates that belief to you as well. And so as a leader, it's really reinforcing that message to your teachers that in this crisis, at this time of need, yes, focus on yourself and make sure you are well, but also see yourself as someone with this great potential to improve the learning and well-being of your learners and their communities too. And so one way of looking at it in terms of our identity as educators is, how do our children imagine us? You know, when we're in a classroom, they can see us, they can hear us, they can interact with us, but now we're at a distance. So we are really someone in their imagination. And so let's influence our learners. Let's encourage them to see us as a beacon or a pillar of security, of safety, of guidance, because they'll be feeling quite anxious and having quite unstable experiences in their home lives and community lives. So where do they look for that guidance? Where do they look for that shining light in dark times? And I want that to be teachers. And just to kind of summarize and to bring some more research into it, it's really the self-belief, as you've written in the question. And so two key factors that improve self-belief is a sense of self-efficacy, which is the belief that I can cause change through the way I teach, and also the sense of agency, which is I have the freedom and I have the choice to do what I think works best in this moment. And so self-efficacy and agency are both products of the conditions we create for teachers. So if as leaders, we're helping teachers see that actually I am effective, I can cause change, I make a difference, that's awesome. If we're also helping teachers to feel that they have freedom and they have choice and they have an opportunity to do things the way they feel works best, again, that's reinforcing that self-belief, which then is connected to their well-being too. So I think, and then this is what I'm definitely experiencing in my work at the moment with the colleagues I work with, we're kind of communicating this to each other and making sure that as much as we have downtime, as much as we have moments to focus on our well-being, that we're also supporting each other as leaders and seeing this as this opportunity to shine.
I think would you also like to explain your perspective with growth mindset? We've heard that from Carol Dweck. We've heard that a lot now in educational circles. Would you want to highlight a bit on that? Many of us here may want to hear that from you.
Absolutely. And I think where growth mindset connects to this moment is growth mindset can work for any type of teacher, and not every type of teacher has to be the leader, the transformer, the change maker. In fact, we do need teachers who do business as usual really well also, who can just deliver quality online learning or distance learning. We need them too. So growth mindset works for them. Growth mindset also works for that teacher who says, actually, we're not going back to normal here. We're creating new normals. We're transforming the way we learn. And so growth mindset helps those teachers see this challenge and see this crisis as an opportunity for change, not as a barrier or a limitation on the way they work. But in fact, this is the disruption that is actually going to give growth to their innovation. And so growth mindset is that whole attitude around how we take this crisis to be our defining moment as educators, and to work in ways that improve access to quality education, improve equity in education, giving people who might not have opportunities to learn or develop in particular ways, giving them a chance to participate like others who are more privileged in their communities. There's so much that can come out of a crisis that isn't just a temporary fix, it actually becomes a long-term solution.
That's wonderful. I mean, I want to highlight one thing that you said, right? We are not going to just bounce back to normal. This is something I've been hearing in every conversation. When are we going to bounce back to normal? I think what you're highlighting here is the post-COVID scenario is going to be a new normal, and valuing every teacher and every stakeholder's contribution is going to be very critical, right? We are not going to be judging from a seat of judgment. Beautifully said, Chris. I thought the takeaway from this can be focus on continuing teacher development in areas like growth mindset. You know, we do a lot of teacher training here on how to teach and how to face the child, how to reach a concept. But I think a conducive environment for teachers to expect, said, the you know, you brought that out so well. It's so important that every teacher feels that I have an autonomy to experiment, I can fail, and from that failure, small failures, I can innovate. And perhaps I was wondering, we should also highlight that schools should not anymore, though it is very convenient to have a standardized process, and India with its huge population and density has always focused on standardization, right? And we've spoken about this. Do we need to slowly shift? I don't know, rapidly shift to loosening the rigidity of certain whole school processes and give autonomy in the hands of teachers, and not expect compliance from a top-down approach. Is that right, Chris? Is that putting the takeaway here?
I think so, and I think standardization has been one of the Indian system's strengths for so long, and we need to build on that strength, because that's where the STEM subjects have been so strong in the Indian system. We need to build on that and actually look at what are the dispositions, the competencies that now support adaptive thinking, creative thinking, innovation. And so I think, again, moments like this with such massive disruption help grow those additional learning qualities. And it's not a standardized plus this, it's standardized and this, where they actually work together really well.
Right. I think you hit the nail on the head. Take the strengths that the system already has and build on it to suit the new normal. I think that's the takeaway there. The question 3, I have 2 parts to it, Chris. One is, of course, moving from mindsets to skills that manifest itself. What skills do teachers need to develop in themselves in this context? And I'll also give the part B of the question, because the participants here are largely school leaders. How can we as school leaders help teachers develop these skills for the new context?
Fantastic. And I'll answer the question as clearly as I can in 2 parts also. I mean, the first part is, what skills do teachers need for this new context? I mean, I think first and foremost, the most important skill is their ability to connect in with their learners and the social and emotional needs of their learners at this difficult time. I mean, again, all the research shows that the number one factor that accelerates learning achievement is the relationship a teacher has with their student. So that first skill is, how do we maintain those relationships whilst being at a distance? So how do we know which technologies, which platforms can connect in with our learners in a way that they still feel that we have their needs and their aspirations as our number one priority? So I think that's the first skill, is how to facilitate relationship online. The second skill is, how do we understand pedagogy? How do we understand effective teaching and learning that is not in a classroom, that is not face-to-face, that actually is perhaps asynchronous, so not happening at the same time as our learners. So we're teaching at a different time to what our learners are learning. And so the second skill is the ability to be adaptive or flexible in our own practice and quickly learn, actually, what does pedagogy online look like to create engaging and impactful learning experiences for students? And so more specifically, it's being able to research, being able to investigate the tools and the strategies that are used to create the type of learning that you want to achieve, but also being able to network quickly with your colleagues in your own school, but maybe with teachers at other schools too, to find out what's working for them. And I think in terms of that skills development, the greatest resource that we have in our education systems right now is actually our teachers and the skills that they can develop independently and share with others. So this isn't an area of expertise for me in terms of digital technologies, but I know some of my colleagues like Jan Maria, who's on this webinar also, has been incredible at identifying the platforms and the tools that can bring learning opportunities together for learners who obviously are working at a distance and cannot access a classroom. And I see someone asked a question in the chat box around, what specific skills? I mean, it really is a title or a label around, effective online facilitation of learning. And again, that's not an area of expertise for me. Again, because we're in this whole new normal, this period of disruption, I think it's up to us as teachers and leaders to define what this looks like at this particular time too. The second part of the question is, how can school leaders help teachers? And I think first and foremost, it's important to find the teachers in your school who are demonstrating leadership, who are being innovative in the way they're solving this learning problem in our current crisis. And so as school leaders, identifying those people who are leading the way, who are identifying good ways of working, and then giving them the opportunity to lead, giving them the opportunity to model for their colleagues what online learning or remote learning might look like for this time. And connecting to the previous two questions, by identifying those lead teachers and giving them opportunities, we're improving that sense of agency, improving that sense of self-efficacy, which then builds that sense of well-being too. So I think for leaders right now, it's seeing who in your team is leading the way, and then helping those people model for colleagues what this online learning success would look like. And I think it's also really important for school leaders to have their, we would say, have your ear to the ground, understand what parents and learners are saying, what they're experiencing, and ensuring that as a leader, we're filtering some of those key messages back down to our teachers, not as a critique or not as criticism, but as an opportunity to learn from our learners. What experiences are they having? How can we improve our practice? And to continually iterate on what we're doing. So as a leader, supporting that process of iterating the strategies you're using so that learners and their families are getting the best experience possible.
I think my favorite quote has been, feedback is a gift, and that's exactly what you're saying. Listen, have your ears on the ground, feedback, collect feedback, don't take it as criticism. Synergize a lot, I can hear you say. Since you mentioned Jane Mary, I want to say that I had a good 1 week with her in New Zealand, and I'm going to touch base with her to understand more on the tools and stuff. I recall the lovely days I had with her and how much I learned from her. So I think you have a fantastic team out there, Chris, and they are going to be a gift for us in this moment. I just thought I should summarize. Yeah, Chris, you have anything to add?
If I can just make one more point. Another great thing school leaders can do is, and I've already touched on this briefly, but really encourage teachers to listen to their learners. Whether you're working with 8-year-olds or 15-year-olds, some of them are way more digitally savvy than we are. They're digital natives. They've been navigating this journey well ahead of us. And so sometimes it's not about creating solutions ourselves as teachers, as professionals. It's actually about developing those solutions with our students. And so again, all that theory that works for teachers at this time of need, for their well-being and their effectiveness, is exactly the same for students. If we're giving them an opportunity to feed into how we're solving this problem, it's a great thing for them too. So yeah, as a leader, encourage your teachers to listen into their students and work with them to create solutions.
Right. I think I'm going to go to the takeaway 3 here. What you've been highlighting, collaborative partnerships, maybe listen, collect feedback, improvise, iterate, and synergize on skill building and enhancement, right? I mean, we have a lot of progressive practices, and like you rightly said, even a 3-4-year-old could have something for us to learn from. So why reinvent the wheel while the autonomy that we spoke of and experiments that we spoke of should continue? Can we learn from one another quickly? And I think that's the big lesson of the hour. Chris, thanks for that. I'm going to, you want to add something right now before I move on to the takeaways again, and then we're going to take questions from the audience. But yeah, tell me. I think you wanted to say something.
Really quickly, and this quote relates to our overall resilience, because for all we know, COVID-19 could be a long experience. And so this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so a great quote I heard last week from an expert in resilience said, let's not lose what we have to what we've already lost. So in terms of collaborating, in terms of iterating, innovating, we've already lost so much in this moment. So this is our opportunity to just try things out and to have a go, to fail, to succeed. And in doing that, we actually gain so much more than what we've lost, if that makes sense. But it's a key part of resilience, is just remembering that, you know, rather than standing back and just waiting for things to get back to normal, let's step forward and try things out, because we don't have that much to lose.
Wow, I think that's so beautifully. I'm able to now visualize resilience from a body posture, you know, leaning in. Yeah, it's so beautiful. Chris, before we go to take some questions from the audience, my colleague Aditya is kind of shortlisting some of the questions that have come up. Others who want to ask some questions, please ask. If we cannot accommodate all of it today, we will definitely, you know, continue our dialogue and ensure that you get some answers from across the world. I just thought, while the takeaways are pretty clear, can we also highlight certain actionables for school principals to start right from today? The very first thing we talked about is the well-being. We were discussing if we could, as school leaders, make 2-3 calls a day to teachers whom you may have, as a busy principal or a busy school owner, not even interacted earlier well, and go beyond work questions, because we've become pretty transactional in our panic work mode, asking our colleagues, hey, what have you done? Have you completed this? Have you done that? Can we go beyond and have some fun calls? Incidentally, this evening, Chrysalians, as we call them, are all assembling on our Teams and conferencing to have a singing session, you know, to unleash ourselves, our creativity, going to have some fun singing. Why not do that? Because there's some, and most important, initiate buddy system in schools, because all teachers may not have the, you know, feel like accessing you, the principal or the leader. Can you have buddy systems so that you understand deeply and listen to the ground on what's happening in a teacher's life, or what are the difficulties, work-based, personal, so that we are out there and don't miss out and regret. We are all very hopeful that the school year will recommence sooner or later. Can we accommodate well-being classes in the timetable, in the rigidity of our eight periods in a day, you know, and 40 minutes is such a powerful word in the Indian education system. How can we include regular meditation, mindfulness for our teachers? Because, like Chris rightly pointed out, preserve them. They are going to be agentic and efficacy-based role that they will be playing. And we were also seeing, from what we heard of parents, each school here has its own stance, right? Some of them are going overboard. You know, some of them are taking it a little cool. Whatever the stance may be, I'm sure there's a lot of thought that has gone into the stance. Publish it. Put out FAQ documents so that the parents, teachers, you as school leaders, all of you are aligned. And this is going to be very, very critical for an alignment that is so important right now. Takeaway 2, we focused on growth mindset, creating an environment for teachers to experiment. We believe that teachers should be given small pilots of remote learning, blended learning, tools that they come across, and then given opportunities to share it, allow teachers to make mistakes, and create sub-blocks within the school to practice varied teaching innovations so that you can learn from one another. Takeaway 3, collaborative partnerships, building skill enhancement, collaborate with trusted partners. I'm sure many here have trusted partners, educational organizations, other schools, and this could bring progressive teaching practices from around the world to your school. Motivate teachers. I think Chris highlighted this in several ways today. Pedagogy in the forefront. While technology tools are going to be the means and an aid, novelty is going to wane after a while, and you know, students are going to seek more from the teachers. And I think we are here, Chris. We are going to have a question time. I'm just hoping there are some good questions that you can take on. What are some strategies for engaging students while teaching can Chris recommend any strategies? Engaging students while teaching online. This particular question does not say which age group. I'm sure it varies from age group to age group, but can you highlight from your experience, Chris?
I mean, again, just to reiterate, I'm not an expert in online or remote teaching, but if I can use my own children as an example, their school is closed down at the moment. They had 48 hours to prepare for not being able to access school. And the strategies I'm seeing their teachers use that are really successful is providing a space where the students can go online and see what activities they have lined up for the day. And there'll be certain times during the day. It might only be, say, half an hour at 10 o'clock and then half an hour at 2 o'clock, just for the teacher and the student to come together and have a quick conversation. One of my daughter's teachers is not using synchronous interaction. What they're doing is they're recording little videos for each other and leaving them, the videos, on the learning platform. And so in terms of the engagement, what my daughters are really excited by is so this daily discovery of activities that are related to this very moment. So they're looking at actually how can we grow food in our garden to supplement our regular diets. So they're doing activities about the garden. And so every day when they go onto into the learning platform, they're seeing new activities they can do by themselves with a little bit of support to get that done. But the thing that's engaging them so much is the regular feedback they're getting from the teacher. And it's not huge amounts of feedback. It's just little comments of encouragement or suggestions on how to improve, a writing skill or a video skill or something like that. And so it's short, regular engagements and interactions with the students. And I think that's what I'm learning at this moment, is that what's really successful is not online learning happening at the same time. It's creating a space where students can be really self-managing and creating activities that are scaffolded enough that the student can guide their way through, but that the teacher's really, really easy to access and to get great feedback from to keep that momentum going.
I think that's a nice bite, I would say, because the synchronicity and asynchronicity is something we should explore now and realize that this is the time. I love it when you talked about the garden. Everybody's talking about technology, glued onto the screen. And shouldn't we be saying through the screen, go out there in the safety of your house or your apartment and look out there. I've been looking at, when I do the Surya Namaskar these days, I'm like, for the first time, I would say, looking at the sun and telling him that, you are there. You haven't stopped rising. So the world is not going to be doomed, So that's the kind of exploration we may need as well. Another interesting question, Chris, what changes are likely to be permanent and should not be rolled back, even when we reach the new normal or the normalcy? What in your thing that we have started now should not go back?
That is a humongous question. That's a very challenging question. I think what's really interesting is some of the so-called changes that COVID-19 is bringing about are not necessarily changes, but things that were already happening. What COVID-19 has meant is that more learners, more schools are having to adapt to the more innovative or the more technology mediated ways of learning. So I think what we won't go back to perhaps might be the idea of face-to-face time all the time. We might actually recognise that through the distance, through some autonomy being given to learners and to teachers, that some really rich new ways of learning have developed. Personally, I would like to see that through this moment in history, on the back of another moment in history being climate change, we're actually creating learning around the context rather than learning for learning's sake. So I say that because my hope is that we take this emergency, we take this crisis as a time to realise that what's most important here is in fact how we relate to each other as people, how we interact globally, how we connect with our communities and with our environment, and actually how our schools can really enhance the way we do that. So my hope is that we don't go back to massive amounts of rote learning in giant textbooks, that we don't go back to 6 or 7 hours sitting stationary in a classroom, that in fact we see that through being locked down at this present time, when we go back to school, school will in fact be something much, much broader than the four walls of a classroom. It will be the world around us as a way of better understanding and better confronting the challenges of our time going into the future.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Maybe just to reiterate and add, the emotional, social resilience, for instance, empathy, for instance. How do schools start building these consciously and not stop with literacy and numeracy? They are important, but how do we go beyond to the social, emotional quotient and metacognitive? I mean, today we are talking about self-regulation, we are talking about self-direction, and social distancing and isolation has proven that looking inwards is going to be very, very critical. Can we start doing that and building those skills in our students permanently, if we were to say so?
Or just quickly, Chitra, I mean, what's amazing is for the last 10 years in New Zealand, we've been working so hard to better connect families with the needs or the aspirations of their learners. So to make sure that our schools are supporting our learners, not as a teacher to student relationship, but a teacher to family relationship. Because, again, the research shows that the better a family is engaged in a student's learning, the better the learner does. And again, what this moment has brought for us is this need to connect with the whole family, because it is the family supporting that learner at home, supporting that learner as they engage online, in the garden, in their community, however possible. So again, my hope, to answer the previous question, is we don't go back to a time where it's just the teacher and the student, that in fact this has given us an opportunity to better connect with families and ensure that everyone is involved in that learning relationship.
Absolutely. And I don't think the digital divide could be bigger than the parental divide, right? Because it's not just connected to literate parents and illiterate parents. This is something that we are saying that community should come together and play a vital role. So that's so important. There's a question on how do we support teachers and students in a country like India with technology limitations and limited connectivity, because I hear that from several schools when they say, we've been giving out some fantastic home learning plans, etc. And we've been conscious of the limitations of technology, but there is a reliance. There is a reliance on technology, Chris. I don't know if this is the right question for someone in New Zealand whom I presume would have much better infrastructure, and it's given in public schools, even in public schools, that there is infrastructure. But what do you think from your perspective?
I mean, it's a great question. And one of the statements that is coming out of this whole crisis is that COVID-19 has been the great equalizer. It brings us together. It shows that the world is one. I think that's a false statement, because in fact, I think COVID-19 is going to accelerate inequity. And exactly as the question states, those who don't have access to fast internet, to devices, to platforms that can support their learning, they're really going to stagnate in their learning if they're not provided with the right interventions and support. And again, I see this is where principals hold such an important role that goes beyond the school and beyond just supporting their teachers, is actually how can they coordinate with the corporate sector, with the philanthropic sector, with the tech sector, to say that in this moment of COVID-19, to prevent further inequity, we've actually all got to work together to make sure everyone, regardless of where they live, has access to the technology they need. And so as much as I am based here in New Zealand, we also have inequity in parts of the population who cannot access technology here. And the solution has been through schools collaborating with government and technology companies to ensure better access. But I've also worked in Bangladesh and India and other parts of the world where the gap between rich and low resource people is enormous. And so I don't think there's anywhere else in the world that you need to be more creative than somewhere like India or Bangladesh right now, because the solutions we need to create will be school-led solutions, but will require so much more than the school to actually make them work. So I think this is where principals or school leaders are so important. It's who is in our networks, who can we bring in to make sure that, whether it's affordable or accessible 4G technology or easy access to the internet and simple devices, can at least keep that learning going.
Yeah, and I just want to quote an analogy here, right? I mean, we had a moment in history 2 years back when we had to move to digital payments, and even people like us resisted it. But today I have my vegetable vendor who says just Google Pay me or something like that, right? So I'm sure there is going to be a phase of inequity, but I'm sure all of us, and I can say from a Chrysalis perspective, we are hard looking at how to talk to policymakers, how to talk to technology companies, how to marry these, listening to the ground to our school leaders. So I'm sure there's going to be a temporary, huge chasm or whatever you call it. But we should hope that this will also ring in a lot of innovative changes. And there's another question for you, Chris, and I'm sure this is right up your alley, on how can we motivate teachers during these this difficult period. We know that teachers are, they struggle personally, professionally. How do you think we can motivate them during this difficult period? Are there any specific things and tips that you have for the school leaders here?
I mean, I think a really helpful or healthy mindset in this regard is that we cannot motivate every teacher. And so there will be teachers who we just cannot influence or encourage to take a leadership role or to innovate in their teaching and learning at this point of time. And that's okay. Let's focus on the ones that we can actually get some momentum with, that we can get some movement with, and let those teachers who we can work successfully with, who are motivated, to bring the other teachers along. And I think it goes back to the very beginning of our conversation, which is, are we providing the freedom? Are we providing the conditions for teachers to try things out and not feel overly accountable to parents or overly accountable to the school, where they can come up with an idea and be supported to see that idea through to fruition? So it could be using a new platform online. It could be establishing a completely different kind of project with, say, 9-year-old learners that's focused around activities at home rather than algebra in the maths book, so to speak. It's just giving teachers that space to feel that they are having an impact and having an effect on the well-being and learning of their students. But I think, again, in the same way that the number one thing that drives student success is their relationship with teachers, I think the number one thing that drives teacher success is the relationship teachers have with their leaders. So relationship is everything. And it's a relationship that's on respect and recognition for the strengths and skills that teachers bring to their job.
Right. Chris, I noticed an interesting question too, right? Is autonomy, does it work best, or is it most effective only with skilled and passionate teachers? I think you always highlight trust. Is it connected? And can you tell us what you think of this?
That's a really, really good question. And I think autonomy doesn't necessarily mean individualistic. Autonomy could mean collective autonomy for a professional learning group or a team of teachers to create together. Trust is such a hard one, right? Because if there are precedents within the school where trust has been low, or if relationships haven't been strong, then it's something that at this very difficult time sort of needs to be built back up. But it's in the same way that we expect a teacher to give regular small doses of positive feedback to support learners. As leaders, we need to give those regular small doses of positive feedback to our teachers too. And I think it's that feedback that embodies the trust we have in our teachers. And when teachers are struggling, it's demonstrating to them that we trust them when we give them space, when we give them time to relax, to unwind, that we trust them to come back on board and to prioritise our collective goal of improving learning for all. And so as a leader, I think one of our greatest qualities is to convey that trust to those we work with.
Absolutely. I believe in any democratization process, trust is very, very important. mutual trust, if I may say so. I think there are some bringing parents on boards, and we as an organization that works with schools have seen this, right? It is 500 600 students means 1,000 different parent mindsets, right? And I know all the leaders here are anxious on, yes, we understand a lot of things that you're saying, we would like to go slow, we would like to pause and make the gift of time, you make use of the gift of time, but our parents are in a hurry, they are panicking. So how do you bring them on board? Because there is a lot of market shift that needs to happen with the parents on board. So any quick tips on that, Chris?
Again, that's a really difficult question. And I mean, in a lot of the countries I work in, we can make great progress with teachers, with school leaders, with learners, but the stumbling block always seems to be parent expectations. And so it's finding that really fine balance between listening to parents and understanding what parents' anxieties and what their aspirations are, but also us trusting in our own authority as experts and informing parents that we know at this point of time, the priority is your child's well-being. The priority is not how fast they're learning at this point of time. The priority is, in fact, how well are they going to be ready for learning, or how prepared are they for learning once this moment resolves. And so as much as parents can be really, really difficult to deal with, and their voice or their spending power within our schools can determine the way we work, it's ourselves also having that evidence-based authority and confidence in our leadership to say, internationally or nationally, this is what the evidence says is most important right now. Here is how it's going to benefit your child. This is why we're taking these actions. And in 2 months' time, in 6 months' time, these will be the benefits that your child will experience as a result of what we've done.
And I think in these times, over communication is better than under communication. Would you accept that? Sometimes we need to keep communicating and be consistent and continuous in our communication. The 3 C's that I always think of. I think, Chris, everybody would like to go on with you. Like I said, everybody would have experienced the calming effect that you bring in, the hope and I'm sure you're leading the way. I just want to, conclude this by also bringing to the audience here that this is going to be a series. And so we will dive deep into areas like curriculum, perhaps about school systems, a little more deeper into technology, how this digital divide can be narrowed, etc. in our future webinars. But we are already close to our time. We said 1 hour, but I'm going to take this opportunity to thank Chris again, and thank the hundreds of educators and school leaders here who have logged in at 10:30, and thanks for your support. We will also be circulating this recording as well as the takeaways and specific insights that we got from Chris. Feel free to keep tapping on our doors, write to us if you have any specific themes for our webinars. We would like to be out there and say, this is the time when an organization like Chrysalis takes charge and helps people around, while we will take care of ourselves and lead the way. Thank you, Chris and Catherine, Jane Mary. I think a big namaste. Today, the namaste has become very relevant with social distancing, and we in India are remembering the good old sages who have taught us a lot of, given us a lot of wisdom. Thank you. Vasudeva Kutumbakam. We are all one, and we feel so close to New Zealand that in the map seems so far away. Thank you. Thank you, Chris, and we'll be in touch with you. Thank you.